The Minnesota Office of the State Auditor presents Tax Increment Financing, a primer for city councils and other TIF authorities. It provides a brief overview of key concepts and considerations for those considering whether to approve the use of TIF. Tax Increment Financing, or TIF, is a financing tool where the new value from a development is captured from the tax base, so that the property taxes on the new captured value, i.e. the tax increments, can instead pay qualifying costs that enable the development to occur. We say that TIF is a financing tool, but it is important to also regard TIF as a set of laws with ongoing requirements, parameters, and limitations. It's not just a financing or accounting mechanism. A TIF authority should be well versed in the laws authorizing and governing TIF. Various development acts authorize projects and the use of TIF. The most common TIF authorities are cities and city entities, such as port authorities, economic development authorities, or housing and redevelopment authorities. County and multi-county HRAs, rural development authorities, and one large metro township can also be TIF authorities. The TIF Act does not authorize projects and the use of TIF. It regulates how TIF works and how it can and cannot be used. Logistically, development acts govern project areas in which broader development activities occur, beyond just the TIF-supported developments. Sometimes they are coterminous with city boundaries. TIF is used more narrowly by creating TIF districts that consist of the parcels on which the financed development will occur. There can be many TIF districts within a single project area. Getting back to TIF as a financing tool, because development costs are generally incurred up front, while tax increments are collected over the duration of the district, debt obligations are needed and become an important consideration. The most common type of debt obligation, representing 66% of TIF debt reported for 2020, is a pay-as-you-go or pay-go note, where the authority has an agreement to reimburse a developer, owner, or note holder for qualifying costs that the developer or owner incurred or separately financed. They've become popular because the risk is not borne by the TIF authority if increments fall short of projections and become insufficient to pay all the costs. General obligation, or GO bonds, are less commonly used compared to the early years of tax increment financing. With these bonds, the municipality pledges their full faith and credit and must raise taxes to pay the bonds if tax increments are not sufficient. Revenue bonds pledge only tax increment revenues and other revenues such as special assessments, and are fairly uncommon because they are less attractive to investors who bear more risk. Many districts make use of interfund loans, where internal dollars are borrowed from another fund of the municipality, usually to cover supplemental costs like administrative costs, rather than as a sole funding source. Next, let's understand how TIF captures value and generates tax increments. When a TIF district is created, the authority must request the county auditor certify the original value of the district for the base year. Any new value in subsequent years, measured as the current minus the original value, will be identified as captured value. For example, here we see the market values on the left and the equivalent net tax capacities on the right. The TIF district was comprised of a parcel with a base year market value of $200,000 or $3,250 of net tax capacity, net tax capacities being the value used for property tax calculations. After development, the current market value is now $3.4 million, or $67,250 of net tax capacity. $3.2 million would be the captured market value, and there is $64,000 of captured net tax capacity. Captured value is not part of the tax base, meaning it is not used to calculate the tax rate or generate local tax levies. Only the original value is part of the tax base. The tax rate is still applied to the captured value, however, and that yields the tax increments that finance the development costs. The implications on the tax base, rates, and levies should be well understood. Capturing value from the tax base directly affects rate calculations. Tax rates are determined by dividing a jurisdiction's adopted property tax levy by the value of its tax base, which excludes the TIF district's captured value. For example, let's assume the city has a total net tax capacity of $1,064,000 and the TIF district has captured $64,000 of net tax capacity. That leaves a total city tax base of $1 million. The city has a total levy of $467,700 of property taxes. The city tax rate would be 46.770% when calculated using the tax base that excludes the captured value. If the TIF district were terminated or not needed, and the $64,000 of captured value became available to support the same levy, the tax rate would be 43.957%. Understand that tax increments are additional taxes. Applying the tax rate to the uncaptured tax base raises the full levy amount. Applying it to the captured value generates additional taxes of nearly $30,000 that are being assessed above the levy amount adopted by the city. The capture of tax base might indirectly impact judgments about how to levy given sensitivity to higher tax rates. In this example, if the TIF district terminated or decertified, the city could raise the levy to maintain the same tax rate, keep the levy the same and let taxpayers enjoy eased tax burdens, or something in between. You can see how creating new tax base has very positive implications if it would not have existed without TIF, while capturing tax base that would have existed anyway without TIF has the opposite implications of raising tax rates, taxes, and the pressure on levy decisions. This is why an important component of TIF is focused on qualified costs that enable the development to occur. A model of the TIF concept helps illustrate. The general premise from its redevelopment origins is that a property might be blighted, where its value is declining or stagnating, and this is expected to continue absent any public intervention or assistance. When a TIF district is created, the original value at that point in time is established, or frozen, as the tax base for the duration of the district. With public financing of TIF in place, development is enabled and the value increases as a result. Again, the tax rate is still applied to the captured value, but those taxes are segregated as tax increments and are not part of the tax levy. When the TIF district ends, taxpayers then realize the public benefits of the endeavor, as the new tax base is available to support local levies. The captured value that provided the tax increments is generally viewed neutrally as the investment that made the benefits possible, rather than negatively as economic loss, given that the development would not have occurred but for the use of TIF. This but-for test is crucial to the proper use of TIF. The statute requires that the municipality must be able to make a finding that, in its opinion, the proposed development would not reasonably be expected to occur solely through private investment within the reasonably foreseeable future, and that the increased market value of the site that could reasonably be expected without the use of TIF would be less than the market value of the proposed development after subtracting the present value of projected increments. In other words, the additional value created by the use of TIF must exceed the value of the investment of increment. But why is the but-for finding so important? In our conceptual model, we started with the premise that the value was declining or stagnating and that this was expected to continue for the foreseeable future absent assistance. If instead proposed development would occur without the use of TIF, the conceptual justification disappears. And when the TIF district is created, the freezing of the tax base for the duration of the district and the capturing of value to generate tax increment represents an economic loss, where tax base that could have supported local levies is instead providing a subsidy to the development. This illustration highlights a worst-case scenario, where the proposed development would happen without TIF. Of course, it may not be so easy to assess what would or would not happen without TIF. The but-for finding, after all, involves some subjectivity. It is unlikely to be so black and white that either no development would occur without TIF or that the proposed development would surely occur without TIF. Judgments must be made about what would reasonably occur absent the use of TIF over a time horizon of up to 26 years. Perhaps only some modest or undesirable development could be expected to occur late in the time horizon, or perhaps a nearly comparable development would likely follow quite soon. In between lies increasingly nebulous possibilities. Perhaps a more common possibility is where, absent the use of TIF, a different development of lesser value would occur later during the TIF district's time frame. In such a scenario, the start of the TIF district effectively leads to higher value development, and the capture of value in increment is neutral, until the point at which the value that would have existed without TIF begins to represent an offsetting economic loss because it would have been available without the use of TIF. In the end, there is public benefit, but it is offset to some degree by the intervening economic loss. These models do not account for the immediate benefits of jobs and economic activity, but they help illustrate the effects taxpayers may experience and the importance of making a studious assessment of the but-for finding. Note that while TIF authorities hold decision-making power over the use of TIF, those decisions impact all of the local taxing jurisdictions. The county, city, school district, and special taxing districts all see their tax base locked into the original value and do not benefit from the new value for the duration of the TIF district. One step in the process of approving a TIF district is to give copies of the proposed TIF plan to the county and the school district, and in some instances to invite the input of county commissioners. Other than an infrequently used option where counties may require certain county road costs be included in the TIF plan, a TIF authority is not bound by any input provided, but giving such input its due consideration is a dutiful part of approving a TIF district. Beyond considering whether or not a proposed district is appropriate to approve, there are additional considerations regarding right-sizing the use of TIF or using it to the proper extent. In our prior example, a TIF district capturing $64,000 of net tax capacity raised $29,933 of tax increment from just the city rate of 46.770%. If the total tax rate of all jurisdictions were 136.866%, the TIF district will collect $87,594 annually. For a redevelopment district, which can collect increment for up to 26 years, this could generate close to $2.3 million over the life of the district. But what if only $1 million of assistance is needed to make the development possible? This raises the important consideration of examining the TIF plan estimates that set the total authorized cost for a TIF district. As a quick overview, a TIF plan must include estimates of bonded indebtedness, original net tax capacity, captured net tax capacity, and its duration. More importantly, the TIF plan must contain separate estimates of the cost of the project for things like acquisition and site improvement costs and including administrative costs, interest as a financing cost, and the tax increment to be generated over the life of the district. These three estimates establish the total authorized costs or budget of a TIF district. The total project costs and financing costs to be paid with tax increments cannot exceed the total estimate of tax increment. Setting appropriate TIF plan estimates that act as the authorized costs to be paid from tax increments is an important consideration. Some might advise maximizing estimated costs to enable the maximum expenditure of increments as a revenue source. This might be done by pooling increments or spending increments outside the district on other costs in the project area. Or is it better to minimize those expenditures to what is necessary to terminate the district as early as possible and reap the tax-based benefits? An authority might also consider setting an earlier duration limit than what is allowed by statute. 26 years, for example, may be far too long to tie up tax base if necessary costs could be financed in 10, 12, or 15 years. There is also an opportunity to share captured value or just to monitor things and decertify early. To further explain, an authority has the seldom used option to share rather than fully capture the new tax base. In this scenario, if from our earlier example, $20,000 of the captured $64,000 of net tax capacity were instead shared, the frozen tax base is essentially raised to include some of the new tax capacity and represent some immediate public benefit that will be enjoyed for the duration of the district. The risk here is whether the diminished tax increments on the remaining captured value will be sufficient should the growth in value end up being less than projected due to the actual scale of development, market conditions, or legislative changes that impact property taxes. This is why most authorities choose not to share value, and a more attractive option may be to decertify the district early once the captured increment has been sufficient to cover the necessary costs. This is consistent with the 5 and 6 year rules direction to identify core in-district costs in the first 5 years and then to decertify once sufficient increment is available to pay those costs. The idea is to limit increment capture to what is needed to achieve early decertification and enjoy the benefits of the expanded tax base as early as possible. Early decertification is actually very common. Based on decertifications that occurred from 2016 to 2020, 70% of redevelopment districts decertified early, as did 78% of housing districts. And not just early by a year or two, but on average by 10 years. Even economic development districts, with their shorter durations, decertified early 37% of the time. Sometimes we encounter municipalities delaying decertification and holding on to surplus increment revenues, or wanting to keep the stream open for more expenditures. However, as we've seen, decertifying early maximizes tax-based benefits, And when unused increments are returned to the county auditor, they are distributed back to the county, city, and school district in proportion to their tax rates. The redistributions are free of tax increment restrictions and can be used for municipal priorities. There is sometimes a false notion expressed that returning increment is giving it back to the state, which is not the case. And it is wise to think broadly and consider the impact on all taxing jurisdictions, not just the municipality. Beyond the broad conceptual considerations, there are additional approval considerations. We do not cover them in detail here, but the following procedural requirements should be understood. First, make sure the TIF plan contains its required elements. In addition to the required estimates already noted, there are various statements, lists, identifications, and descriptions that are required, as well as possible elections, such as delaying first receipt of increment, that must appear in the TIF plan if used. Second, in addition to the but-for finding, a municipality must make other findings, including district type and purpose findings, a finding of conformity with municipal plans, a finding related to affording maximum opportunity for private development, and if located in a fiscal disparities region, an election of the computation method that resolves how capture of tax increment will work relative to the making of fiscal disparity contributions associated with the new value. And third, make sure to follow the published notice, county notice, and public hearing procedural requirements prior to approving the TIF district. Moreover, there are many legal considerations involved in the use of TIF that can affect not only TIF plans in the creation of a district, but also the ongoing actions and operations of the TIF district over its full duration. The list here captures some of the broad areas of provisions and restrictions. Provisions may require actions like returning increment, decertifying a district early, providing notifications, addressing errors, annual reporting, and remedying violations. Getting legal or professional advice is a good idea when using TIF, as are regular reviews to ensure that activities remain in compliance with the TIF Act. Therefore, approving a TIF district is not just closing a deal on a proposed project. It's also making a long-term commitment to segregate and track funds, monitor legal compliance, maintain and retain documentation, and complete reporting obligations. Municipalities should honestly assess their own administrative capacities and take care to establish clear duties and processes to avoid consequences that may follow from poor record keeping and improper activities. This concludes our primer. To learn more about TIF, please refer to additional videos and resources on our website or contact us with any questions you may have. Thanks for watching.